In a remote corner of our vast land, where you wouldn't encounter a soul for dozens of miles, stood a tiny hamlet. Its little houses seemed deserted. Rare lights occasionally flickered in the twilight, just hinting that life was still simmering somewhere within. In this village, a solitary old man found refuge, known to the few remaining residents as Jedediah. His house was on the very edge of the village, bordering endless prairies and hills where winds roamed freely, meeting no resistance. And in winter, fierce frosts chilled to the bone. They say fate has a way of bringing together the most dissimilar beings, crossing their paths when it's especially needed, even if such encounters seem meaningless. This was the case with Jedediah, who was destined to meet a creature known for its secrecy and independence. A Pallas's cat. The very mention of the Pallas's cat, or Otocolobus manual, among biologists and naturalists evokes awe and admiration. This wild cat, with its fluffy gray fur and hypnotic gaze, has long been considered almost a phantom guardian of quiet, deserted expanses and high-altitude steppes. People rarely encountered it in the wild, as the Pallas's cat avoids humans, easily blending into the landscape and disappearing unnoticed. However, fate decided otherwise. To say that the beginning of their story was loud or impressive would be incorrect. Sometimes the greatest events happen quietly and routinely, as if nature, tired of the noise, decides to arrange everything in absolute silence. But it is in this silence that true magic lies. Life is capable of opening a completely new chapter for us at any moment, if only the heart has not yet lost the ability to feel. That winter evening, Jedediah, as usual, was sitting by the small stove in his old cabin. A blizzard was raging outside the window, but the old man was hard to surprise with the whims of the weather. His modest life had remained unchanged for many years. The stove fire flickered, casting bizarre shadows on the walls darkened by time. It seemed that the whole village was asleep, but this stagnation, this unbreakable silence, held a surprise, as if nature was preparing something important. And at that moment, under the most howling gust of wind, the old man heard an indistinct sound, resembling either a moan or a plaintive cat's meow, coming from somewhere outside. At first, he didn't even believe his ears. He got up, went to the door, put on his worn-out parka, and taking a lantern, took a couple of steps onto the porch. The swirling snow blinded him, preventing him from seeing anything in the distance, and Jedediah was already about to go back inside when his ear caught a repeated, faint moan. Somewhere there, at the edge of his rickety fence, something was hiding. The old man went down the slippery steps into the yard. Each of his steps sank into the fresh crust of snow. With difficulty, he still noticed a vague stirring of gray fur a few yards away, almost merging with the surroundings. Carefully, without making sudden movements, he brought the lantern closer to the small creature. And at that moment, he flinched. Two huge eyes were looking at him, filled with such despair, as if the very spirit of the forest was embodied in this little animal. It was a Pallas's cat, a wild cat, wounded and frozen. Seeing a Pallas's cat so close was a truly wondrous revelation for Jedediah. He knew that these animals lived somewhere in the prairies and hills, but had never encountered them so closely. The beast seemed to be at the end of its strength. Thus began their story, full of pain, longing, but also touching moments. Neither Jedediah nor the Pallas's cat could yet understand that from now on they were bound by ties of trials and subsequent strong friendship. It all began that blizzardy night when a lonely old man, muffling his own pain, could not pass by an even more defenseless creature. Chapter 2. Description of the environment. Before we talk about further events, it is worth dwelling on the nature and conditions in which the Pallas's cat lives and in which our Jedediah is forced to exist. These places are famous for their severity. In winter, blizzards strike suddenly. Wild winds spread snow charges across the ground, forming high drifts and making roads impassable. Tourists are rarely seen here, and even if you meet daredevils, it's only in the summer when the prairies are fragrant with the tart aromas of sagebrush and prairie grasses. Well-kept fields are replaced by wild expanses, where the grass sways in the wind, creating waves like the sea. But in winter, everything is covered with a white blanket. The Pallas's cat, possessing thick fur and short legs, is adapted to such a cold climate. Its fur, hairs grow so densely that the animal is not afraid of strong winds. It knows how to hide imperceptibly in the folds of the terrain, in marmot burrows, or in rock crevices. But even with such endurance, Pallas's cats suffer from hunger, disease, and human activity. When they find themselves near human dwellings, it always turns into a special story. At the very edge of the village, where the old man lived, there were low hills. They seemed to protect from overly strong winds, but in winter, this proved insufficient to protect crops and roads. Sometimes frosts reached 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and the biting wind painfully whipped the face. At such moments, it seemed that nature itself was giving a person a test. Will you be able to survive here? Will you be able to preserve what you have in your soul when everything around seems insensitive and dead? In this kingdom of ice and snow, a person is often left alone with their loneliness. Perhaps it was it that forced Jedediah to leave the city bustle and move here, to this dilapidated cabin on the edge of silence. Loneliness itself is different. It can be destructive, or it can become a new turn if a person has found meaning in their secluded life. However, judging by the old man's eyes, in which unspoken longing was read, it was clear that these places gave him peace, but not true happiness. The village, once inhabited by dozens of families, gradually died out. Some left in search of a better life, some died, and young people primarily sought to get to the city. Over time, only those remained who had nowhere to go, or who loved these lands with all their heart. Jedediah belonged to both at the same time. He had a quiet devotion to nature, nostalgia for those days when his life was still full of sounds, the laughter of grandchildren, the chores of his wife, the advice of good neighbors. Now, out of habit, he got up at dawn, stoked the stove, went for water to the well, which was across the road, and walked back with detached sadness. Thus flowed the days, slowly and relentlessly, like meltwater under the ice, imperceptibly, but constantly. The Pallas's cat that the old man found was part of this wild nature, embodying all its hidden essence. It was probably destined to die that winter, if not for Jedediah's chance appearance. It seemed that nature itself decided to give a person another chance, not only to save the beast, but also himself from plunging into the bottomless abyss of loneliness. Silence reigned around, but in fact this silence is never absolute. The wind talked to the trees, dry branches creaked in the frost, foxes ran in the fields at night, crows floated in the sky, looking for prey. Somewhere among these invisible streams of life, the Pallas's cat was probably waging its struggle, hunting small rodents, hiding from predators. However, the injury did not allow it to survive. Whether it was a wound from a fight with another individual or the consequence of a fall, no one will ever know. But the fact remained: the animal, whitish and almost invisible in the snow, found in a helpless state, found salvation from a creature alien to it, a human. Chapter 3. The Old Man's Lonely Life. Jedediah's story was not easy. He was born back when villages were thriving, and large families were considered the norm. His youth was spent in the noise of holidays, working in the local fields, and evenings by makeshift benches. His father taught him to carve wooden toys, and his mother to love nature and respect life. He grew up as a lively, inquisitive boy, seeing adventure in every bush. But new times came. He studied, left for the city, where he met his future wife. He started working in a factory, later went into small business. Life went on as usual. A wedding celebration, the birth of a son, chores, joys, sorrows. Everything like many others. However, years passed, and one day tragedy struck. His wife died in a car accident, innocent, unfairly. Jedediah was left with a small son. For 10 years, he was engaged in raising him, trying to give his son all the best. When his son grew up, he also unexpectedly passed away due to an illness that undermined him too early. 2 losses, his wife and child, broke Jedediah. He was already in his late 40s when he realized that he was completely alone. The pain that arose inside overshadowed everything else. Sorrows multiplied by a sense of guilt. What if I could have helped? What if I should have found another doctor, other medicines? Having lost meaning in city life, he sold everything he had and returned to his native places, hoping to find at least some consolation. That's how he ended up in this semi-abandoned village, in the dilapidated house of his parents, who had long since passed away. Neighbors initially met him warily. They knew about his tragedy, but how could they help? Those who had not yet left the village lived poorly themselves, worked a lot, or were busy with their own worries. Only time remained. The most ruthless healer. Years went by. Jedediah tried to get used to the measured rural life. He got a few chickens, a small garden, went to the local store, where he occasionally talked to the saleswoman about the weather and flower prices. But behind these everyday routines, he longed, feeling that life was rolling into emptiness. No children, no grandchildren. He was cut off from the future, as it seemed to him. Sleepy days were replaced by even sleepier nights. Sometimes the village elders persuaded him to join rare gatherings, like modest holidays, but he lacked the strength to have fun. When he saw a small Pallas' cat, shivering from the cold on his doorstep that winter night, something seemed to respond inside his heart, as if life opened a curtain and showed his frozen soul something in need of sympathy, of protection. The most amazing thing was that Jedediah did not see just a wild animal in the Pallas' cat. He saw a defenseless creature, just as lonely and abandoned by fate as he was. Thus was born the thought that the old man could not express in words, but understood with his heart. If I save this beast, maybe I will save myself. Let it sound high-flown, but that's how the human soul is arranged. Sometimes, finding ourselves in a dark abyss, we suddenly find light in the most unexpected place. In caring for another being, when our own pain seems to recede, giving way to compassion, it is striking that it was a wild cat, known for its reclusiveness, its untamed nature, that turned out to be the one who could soften the heart of a lonely old man. Chapter 4. The Appearance of the Pallas' Cat. When Jedediah, bending over the wounded animal, tried to pick it up, the Pallas' cat hissed and tried to bite, but it had no strength left. The old man was afraid to cause even more pain, so he acted carefully, trying not to make sudden movements. The Pallas' cat was extraordinarily beautiful, even wounded. Thick, fluffy fur, with grayish and smoky shades, and eyes. Huge, yellow-green, the depth of which the old man could not fathom. These eyes expressed fear, distrust, and pain. Through the howling of the wind, rising to the porch, Jedediah felt his ears and hands freezing, despite thick mittens. He tried to bring the animal into the warmth, realizing that here, at the door, it would surely die. When he put the Pallas' cat on the floor, in front of the stove, it tried to turn around and run into a corner, but its paws slipped. It took an uncertain step and fell. It became clear that one of its hind legs was apparently dislocated or badly bruised. The old man went into the pantry, from where he brought an old blanket. Spreading it out in front of the stove, he gently nudged the Pallas's cat so that it could lie down on a softer bedding. The Pallas's cat was nervous, breathing intermittently, but it did not have enough strength to get out. Jedediah did not know what to feed the wildcat. He had a supply of cereals, a little salted meat, several cans of fish. He thought that the cat was a predator and decided to give it some raw meat, which he managed to cut off from a piece of pork that was lying frozen in the shed. While the meat was defrosting in a bowl by the stove, the old man watched the Pallas's cat, trying to understand its condition. If it doesn't eat, I don't know what to do, Jedediah thought. He himself knew little about medicine, especially veterinary medicine. For years he lived without pets, except that he occasionally fed chickens. But this is quite different. Although, he reasoned, maybe I should show it to a veterinarian in the county seat. But it's about 40 miles to the county seat on a snow-covered road, and where to take it. The bus doesn't run in winter, there's no personal transport. The thoughts were agonizing, but there was little he could do except provide warmth, peace, and food. When the meat thawed slightly, Jedediah put it in front of the Pallas's cat. It froze for a while, then hissed quietly, but hunger was stronger than fear. Cautiously, looking askance at the man, the beast began to eat. Each bite caused it obvious pain. Perhaps its ribs were also damaged. The old man felt uneasy. He felt responsible, as if fate had entrusted him with the life of this wild creature with the highest level of independence. But now, at this moment, this fluffy, unhappy little animal was completely dependent on his mercy. Jedediah did not sleep all night, listening to the heavy breathing of the Pallas's cat, to the periodic whimpering. He threw firewood into the stove so that the house would not get cold. Just yesterday, the old man was only thinking about how to while away another long night, and now he had an important matter. By morning, the blizzard subsided, and in the pre-dawn light, it was visible how all the paths were covered with snow. But the house stood in silence, and a gray, fluffy life curled up in a ball by the stove. At dawn, the old man examined the wounds of the Pallas's cat. It allowed him to do this, although it growled several times, baring its teeth. Jedediah noticed a small cut on the right side and that the hind leg was swollen. The main thing is that there is no fracture, he thought. He remembered that somewhere, he still had a first aid kit with peroxide and bandages. With difficulty, but carefully, he washed the wound on the side, inwardly horrified at the suffering that this wild creature must be experiencing. The Pallas's cat writhed and tried to bite, but the old man showed persistence. The wound had to be treated, otherwise pus and inflammation could kill the beast. Thus passed their first night together, the first test of character of a man, for mercy and patience of a Pallas's cat, for the ability to trust, even to a small extent, someone whom it had considered an enemy or danger all its life. Chapter 5. The Birth of Friendship. Winter did not give up. Snowfalls with short breaks went on for 1 week, another. Until mid-February, the entire district resembled a fabulous kingdom of white expanses. The roads were covered with snow so much that it seemed that there was not a single route left by which one could get to the county seat, let alone to neighboring villages. During this time, the Pallas's cat, whom the old man began to affectionately call Manny, noticeably grew stronger. The paw no longer looked so swollen, the pain subsided, and Manny could already take a few steps around the house, although it was still limping. It quickly realized that the stove was warmth and safety, and also, there was a kind man who brought food. Jedediah initially did not know how to deal with food for a wildcat, so every day he wriggled out as best he could. Sometimes pieces of chicken, sometimes canned fish, sometimes meat scraps, which he had to carefully economize. Often, Jedediah sat in his shabby armchair by the stove, watched Manny, and thought, "But if it weren't for this blizzard, if it weren't for that evening, I might have whiled away the days in solitude, complaining about fate." Now every day brought new worries, and in these worries, the old man even became younger in spirit. Anxiety about Manny's health, efforts to get suitable food for it, attempts and even tricks to somehow clean its fur from burrs and dirt, all this filled his everyday life with meaning. Manny still remained wild. It did not seek affection, did not rub against legs like an ordinary domestic cat. When Jedediah tried to pet it, the beast tensed up, looked warily from under its fluffy muzzle. Nevertheless, something more than a simple need for food and warmth had already arisen between them. Sometimes in the evenings, when the stove was blazing and the wind was knocking outside the windows, Manny got out of its bedding and sat down a little, away from the old man, at a safe distance for it. It sat and looked at him, as if also thinking about who this strange man was, why he did not harm it. In such moments, the old man, stroking his bearded chin, told the beast about his life, as if pouring out the words accumulated in his soul, which there was no one else to say to. "You see, Manny, I myself do not know why I live. What was important is long gone, and then you appeared, yes. Maybe we need each other." Of course, the Pallas's cat did not understand human words, but in the tone, in the gestures, in the very aura of the man, there was that peace and sincerity that an animal feels acutely. Gradually, the initial wariness began to melt in Manny's eyes. It learned to see in Jedediah not only a source of food, but also a being who gives warmth, the warmth not only of the stove, but also of the heart. From time to time, the old man wondered what to do next. What if Manny decides to leave in the spring? Will I have to let it go, or will I try to dissuade it from returning to the wild? These thoughts worried him because he understood that the Pallas's cat was not a domestic cat, and to keep the animal by force meant going against the laws of nature. But his heart stubbornly did not want to let go of the only friend that fate had sent him in this late period of life. Jedediah tried not to think far ahead. It was important that Manny fully recovered, and what would happen next, time would tell. And yet, day after day, an unspoken friendship grew stronger between them. A lonely soul always needs support. Sometimes it is not a person, but a dog, a cat, even a small chick. In this case, it was Manny who seemed to bring light into Jedediah's house. And perhaps, for Manny itself, the presence of the old man became a kind of salvation, not only physical, but also spiritual. Although in the animal world, such concepts do not sound like they do in humans. Chapter 6. Trials and Internal Conflict. By the end of winter, Jedediah's food supplies had noticeably decreased. There was so much snow that getting out somewhere for provisions became problematic. A small store in the village was open once a week, and on the shelves, you could most often find only the most necessary things: flour, sugar, salt, bread, sometimes canned goods. Meat products were rarely brought here, and if they were quickly bought up. The old man could not count on his chickens. There were only a few of them, and they laid eggs very irregularly at such a harsh time. But the main thing was that the cat, and a Pallas's cat is essentially also a cat, but a wild one, needed enough meat. Jedediah understood that he needed to stock up on food for Manny. He was no fool. He realized that the beast would not yet be able to provide itself with food by hunting. Its paw still hurt, and besides, it was difficult to get rodents and hares in winter. Apparently, I'll have to go to the county seat myself, the old man thought. but the prospect of breaking through snow-covered roads frightened him. In addition, his age was no longer the same. His heart sometimes played tricks. The risk was great, because if a blizzard caught him on the way, he himself could die. The internal conflict only intensified. Jedediah blamed himself for accustoming a wild beast to his food, to warmth. What if it was a mistake? Maybe I should have just helped it recover and released it so that it could get its own food. Maybe I'm making it weak, dependent on me. What will happen if I die? Or if I completely run out of strength to feed it? Such thoughts spun in his head, poisoning the joy of communicating with the Pallas's cat. But every time the old man saw Manny's eyes, full of albeit hidden but trust, as the beast quietly approached him closer, feeling that it was safe here, the old man's heart softened. He had become too attached to his new pet. By the end of February, the weather had improved slightly, but there was still a lot of snow. However, Jedediah decided to go for supplies. He took a sled, harnessed a local horse from a neighbor for a small fee. He himself had not had a horse for a long time. He said to the Pallas's cat, strictly, "Stay here. I'll be back soon. Don't be bored." Manny, of course, did not answer, only glanced towards the door, but from its look, it was clear. It was wary, did not understand where its human was disappearing to. Jedediah tried to be cheerful, but inside he was trembling. What if something happened? Because if he was delayed or did not return, the beast would freeze in the house, and the old man himself could experience many hardships on the way. The road to the county seat took half a day. The neighbor's horse went reluctantly, falling into the loose snow. The wind still pricked his face. The frost nipped at his hands, but in his soul, the old man held on firmly. "I must. Otherwise, there will be nothing to feed it with." Having arrived, he bought some meat, cereals, canned fish, medicines in case of exacerbation. He took some flour and tea for himself. He had little money, but he tried not to complain. The main thing was to buy the most important things. He returned in the evening. The blizzard started howling again. All in snow, with a face red from frost, Jedediah led the horse to his cabin. Barely opening the door, he shouted loudly, "Manny, I'm back." It was cold at home. The fire in the stove had long gone out, and the Pallas's cat was sitting, curled up in a ball in a corner. And at the appearance of the owner, it raised its head as if asking, "Well, did you leave me for long?" Seeing his old man, the beast tensed slightly, but already without obvious fear. Apparently, it had become accustomed to his noisy greetings. As if sighing with relief, it blinked its yellow eyes and stretched. Jedediah quickly began to melt the stove. His whole body ached. His legs were buzzing from the long road, but in his soul, there was a quiet satisfaction. There were supplies. Now they would survive the rest of the winter. And when the stove flared up, Jedediah broke off a piece of freshly bought meat and gave it to Manny. It began to eat with pleasure, and Jedediah understood that all his worries, his long journey today, for the sake of this moment, when the hungry beast purrs contentedly at the sight of food. In such moments, you don't even want to ask questions about the correctness of this decision. You just want to continue doing what you are doing. Chapter 7. Climax of the story. March brought some warming, but the weather was changeable. During the day, the sun began to warm, and by evening, frosts again made themselves felt. The snow began to melt, forming a heavy slush. Jedediah felt a surge of strength in himself. He planned to clear the yard, repair the fence, sometimes even hummed quiet songs, remembering his youth. More and more often before going to bed, he glanced at Manny and thought, and what will happen next? But life is an amazing thing. It always finds a way to present an unexpected turn. One evening, when the sun had already hidden behind the hills and heavy clouds covered the sky, Jedediah heard dull blows and a cry outside the window, resembling the voice of a man calling for help. Although the village was almost deserted, sometimes someone passed by or came in on business. The old man jumped out into the street and saw that a man was lying near one of the empty houses and groaning. Running up, he saw that it was a visiting hunter, bleeding from a torn wound on his leg. Apparently, he was bitten or attacked by some wild dog or wolf when he was making his way through the thickets. Jedediah helped the hunter get to his house, laid him on a bench, treated the wound as best he could, remembering old skills. He was hardly able to speak coherently, but muttered that he had shot some beast somewhere, apparently a wolf, but it had managed to bite him in the end. So, Jedediah thought, everything has become serious. I would need to take the man to the hospital to get rabies shots, but the hospital was far away, and driving at night on such a road was unthinkable. So the hunter found himself under the same roof as the Pallas's cat. Soon he woke up, saw the wild cat, and reacted extremely negatively. "What are you doing, old man, keeping a wild beast in the house? It will grab you by the throat and bite you." Jedediah only shook his head. "Don't be afraid. It's not a wild beast in that sense. Not a wolf. It was wounded. I nursed it. A smart beast. It won't touch you for no reason." The hunter sat up, looking around through the pane. "A Pallas's cat, is it? I've heard of them. Yes, they've become much fewer, they say. They're almost listed in the Red Book." The old man did not answer anything, continued to heat water, looking for painkillers in the first aid kit. But the hunter, having regained consciousness, became irritated, grumpy. He could be understood. The pain was affecting him. At night, he got up a couple of times, swore, tried to find his weapon. Jedediah took the gun to the pantry so that no trouble would arise. Manny, accustomed to silence and peace, noticed a stranger, became nervous, and tried to stay away. Hostility was red in its eyes. After all, the hunter smelled of gunpowder, blood, and something dangerous. In the morning, when the first rays peeked into the house, the hunter said that he needed to get to the county seat to get checked by doctors. Jedediah understood that it was now necessary to organize transport. A neighbor's horse would not be enough. The hunter had to be taken in a sled. The road was difficult, but there was no choice. Jedediah decided, "I'll go with him. I'll help. I can't leave a person in trouble." He was getting ready quickly, and a question was already buzzing in his head. What if I leave with him and Manny stays? Will I return in time? Will it not run away? But the old man had no choice. He put a large piece of meat in Manny's bowl, poured water, stoked the stove to keep the warmth longer. Then he said to the beast strictly, "Sorry, I can't do otherwise. I need to help this man. I'll be back by evening. You stay here for now. You won't be lost." Of course, it is impossible to explain all the details to a wildcat, but Jedediah hoped that Manny would stay. He went to the exit, and the hunter, suffering from a wound, was already waiting for him outside. The old man took him to the county seat. The road was long and agonizing. The hunter groaned from pain. The cold pierced through. Several hours passed while they got there. There, Jedediah handed his comrade over to the doctors and, as best he could, explained the situation. Then it was necessary to buy some more food, because at home, he was spending almost everything on Manny. And then, the way back. When the sun was setting, Jedediah finally reached his native village. There was no strength left. Everything ached, but he hurried home. His heart could not find peace. He was afraid that something had happened during his absence. When he entered and saw an empty room, his heart skipped a beat. "Manny, Manny, where are you?" But there was no answer. The old man anxiously began to walk around the rooms. Snow had blown through the gap in the door, which had been opened by the wind. It seemed that the Pallas's cat had disappeared. Jedediah felt like everything inside him had broken off. Has it really run away? Or did it get sick, crawl away somewhere to die? He began to examine the street, calling the beast, but there was silence everywhere. Only a branch creaked in the wind, and a rare crow croaked high in the sky. Falling on the doorstep, Jedediah burst into bitter tears. He could not believe that he had so quickly lost what had become dearer to him than all treasures. Maybe Manny was offended that I left it in the house, or in it look for a way out and go free. Getting out into the backyard, the old man saw that one of the windows was ajar. Apparently, Manny had jumped out there, slipping on the windowsill. Tracks in the snow led beyond the fence, and there they were lost in the snowdrifts. Saving the hunter, the old man could forever lose his little friend. He hardly slept at night, listened to the howling of the wind, and reproached himself. Here it is, my fate. As soon as something good appears in life, it slips away. In the morning, despite fatigue, he went outside and followed the tracks. But the snow had thawed overnight, and then froze, and almost nothing remained of the tracks. All day, Jedediah wandered around the district, looked into empty yards, called Manny, but all to no avail. By evening, he returned exhausted, barely staggering, to his house. Emptiness and a hollow echo answered him. Manny is gone. Chapter 8. Resolution and Moral. A week passed. Jedediah was going through a difficult time. It seemed that together with Manny, the meaning that had appeared so unexpectedly had again left his life. Now he aimlessly wandered around the yard, mechanically fed the chickens, stoked the stove. The former longing returned, and perhaps even sharper, because the loss of something new sometimes hurts more than old grief. Sometimes he thought, well, maybe it was supposed to be like this. The wild beast returned to its nature, and I am alone again. The main thing is that I saved it. At least it recovered, got back on its feet, so it won't be lost. And I remained human. I couldn't leave the hunter in trouble. I couldn't have done otherwise. April came. The snow gradually melted, the sun shone brighter, the first greenery appeared in the thawed patches. Looking out the window one day, Jedediah noticed how the neighbors' children, they sometimes came to visit their grandmother, were running along the street, laughing, rejoicing at the spring warmth. And suddenly he heard a strange sound behind the door. Something was knocking, as if with claws on wood. The old man opened the door, and his heart stopped for a moment. Manny was standing in front of him. How it returned from where remained a mystery. Traces of hikes were visible on its fur. It was matted in places and covered with small lumps of dirt. But Manny's eyes were full of life and anticipation. It may have returned to feel again the warmth that it once received under the roof of this strange man. The old man could not hold back tears of joy. He thought that perhaps Manny was convinced. Wild nature remains home, but now it has a second point of support where it can come when cold weather or trouble comes. Is it wild? Does it contradict the nature of the animal? Maybe partly yes, but life is too complex to fit into straightforward rules. Several more years have passed since then. Jedediah continued to live in his humble hut, raised not only chickens, but also got several rabbits for meat, began to go out among people a little more often. He smiled more often and willingly helped rare neighbors. And Manny roamed the district, disappeared for a long time in the prairies and hills. But when severe frosts came and hunting became scarce, it always returned. The old man understood. This is a free creature. I cannot own it, but I can give it shelter and care. In this story, a simple moral is hidden. Sometimes we save another, and in fact we save ourselves. Friendship with a wild beast that does not know how to cuddle like a domestic cat has become a symbol that trust can be born where you do not expect it. A lonely old man finds hope thanks to the fact that fate brings him together with someone to whom he gives warmth and care. Sometimes this is how light is born in the human soul. In an act of compassion, when we go beyond the bounds of our own sorrow and try to help someone else. Chapter 9. Conclusion. The story of the Pallas's cat and the lonely old man is not so much a domestic tale as a parable about how important it is not to withdraw into oneself, even when life seems hopeless. The Pallas's cat, a predatory cat from the prairies and mountains, personifies the wild, indomitable force of nature, which can be hostile and incomprehensible to humans. However, even in this force, there is a need for help. Injuries, diseases, harsh winters, all this proves that survival in the wild is not so easy. When the Pallas's cat is on the verge of death, it is the human hand that saves it, giving it a second chance. Jedediah, who lost his family, believed that nothing good would ever happen in his life again, that he was simply living out his days in the backwoods. But helping a wild beast awakens a dormant force in his soul, the very one that is called mercy, love for the world, responsibility for those who are weaker than us. And although the Pallas's cat will not become a pet in the classic sense, its periodic presence gives the old man a sense of being needed. A person, even an old one, finds meaning to care for someone who has become his friend. Over time, people became accustomed to seeing the strange neighborhood, a lonely old man and a free Pallas's cat, which sometimes disappears into the hills, then returns to warm itself by the stove on inclement evenings. Someone twirled their finger at their temple, saying, "They say, the old man has completely lost his mind." But those who knew understood. There in a small house, true friendship reigns, binding two solitudes. This is the quintessence. Shared pain becomes a little easier, and shared care for another turns the emptiness of life into a bright anticipation of each new day. And perhaps this is the deepest lesson that can be learned from the story of the Pallas's cat and the lonely old man. Any soul, even one that lives in the body of a wild beast, can teach us to love. And any old man living out his days in an abandoned village can give a chance to survive to someone who is completely unlike him. Such a story cannot be called absolutely happy, because life is rarely a fairy tale. But in its quiet, almost imperceptible turns, there is a great miracle: friendship, compassion, the ability to start all over again, even when it seems to you that all roads are long closed. Harsh nature, cold blizzards, and human bitterness. All this is just a background for revealing the invisible power of love. As if through gray everyday life, a ray of light breaks through, reminding us that in any circumstances, a person is able to change someone else's life, and at the same time, save their own. Let this story not be about princes and princesses, but about a simple man and a wild cat. But it is alive and real, and, perhaps, everyone in it will see something that can touch the heart and give hope that even in the harshest conditions, love and mutual understanding are possible.